Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at Hebrews chapter 3 in our continuing study of the general epistles. Back in Hebrews chapter 1, we saw that angels are great, they are mighty, they are glorious. C.S. Lewis said one time, if you ever saw an angel, you'd probably be tempted to bow down and worship it. But as great as angels are, the Son is better. Which brings us to the next point, that Jesus didn't come to serve angels, we see that in chapter 2, but instead he came to make us sons of God, that we are the beneficiaries of his ministry. In chapter 2, verses 16 and 17, he summed up, for assuredly he does not give help to angels, he didn't come to serve angels, but he gives help to the descendant of Abraham. Therefore, he had to be made like his brethren in all things, so that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in things pertaining to God, to make propitiation for the sins of the people. He became, he was the Son of God, and he came to give help to the seed of Abraham. That's you, that's me. We who were made like his brethren in all things, so that he might be that merciful and faithful high priest. And so this high priest theme, it's introduced here. We're going to see it develop later on. But before we go there, we're going to go to chapter 3. And there we're going to see a comparison, not with angels anymore, but instead with Moses. So since he himself was tempted in that which he has suffered, he's able to come to the aid of those who were tempted. Chapter 3, verse 1, therefore, holy, notice we're called brethren, just in case you didn't remember that, partakers of a heavenly calling, consider Jesus the apostle and high priest of our confession. In other words, the number one person of our confession. He was faithful to him who appointed him, as Moses also was in all his house. For he has been counted worthy of more glory than Moses, by just so much as the builder of the house has more honor than the house. Now, remember, the focus is upon us as brethren. We're think about what a brother is in a family. A brother is part of the household. A brother that's what you refer to the people in the house. And Jesus has become our high priest. So that brings us now to this comparison between Moses and Jesus. Moses was faithful. Jesus was faithful. That's the point. The point's made for both. In the case of Moses, he was given honor. He's the representative. He's the servant of the house of God. But in the case of Jesus, he's given more honor. He's the builder of the house of God. In the case of Moses, he was faithful in the house of God as a servant. In the case of Jesus, he's faithful in the house of God as the son over the house, the heir of the house, the one who receives the inheritance. Can I say it this way? He's the owner of the house because he's the builder of the house. Now, chapter 3, verse 3, for he has been counted worthy of more glory than Moses, by just so much as the builder of the house has more honor than the house. Who's the builder of a house? Now, don't think just physical house. Think family house. The house of David or the house of Abraham. In other words, it's the family that's in view. For every house is built by someone, but the builder of all things is God. And so Jesus built God's house and put that together with, wait a second, all things were built by God. And if Jesus built God's house and all things were built by God, what that is saying, therefore, is telling us who Jesus is. It's pointing to his identity of one that's better. Now, verse 5, Moses was faithful in all his house as a servant for a testimony of those things which were to be spoken later. But Christ, the Messiah that is, Christ was faithful as a son over his house, whose house we are, if we hold fast to our confidence and the boast of our hope firm until the end. Did you catch that? Jesus built God's house. Moses, by contrast, served in the house of God. Do you see the next thing? whose house we are. We are the house. Jesus built the house. Moses served the house. We are the house. If, there's an if clause, if we hold fast our confidence and the boast of our hope firm until the end. You see, that's the issue for which the writer to the Hebrews is addressing. Are you going to hold fast? You started to, but are you going to continue because you're being tempted to, can I say it this way, to leave the house and to try to go back to the old house? You're trying to leave Jesus and go back to Moses. You can't go back. But they're being tempted to try. And so there's a warning. We are that house if we hold on that confidence and boast of our hope firm until the end. That's the big if clause. So, verse 7. Therefore, just as the Holy Spirit says, and now we have an Old Testament quote, it's from Psalm 95, today if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as when they provoked me, as in the day of trial in the wilderness, sort of taking the readers of the Psalm back to that wilderness experience of how the Israelites had provoked God in the wilderness. But notice he's not saying you're doing that now. He's saying don't go and do what they did if you'll hear his voice. Where your fathers tried me by testing me and saw my works for 40 years. Learn from their mistake. Verse 10, therefore I was angry with this generation, still part of the same quote, and said, they always go astray in their hearts, and they did not know my ways. As I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest. Circle that word rest, because we're going to be seeing that both in the rest of this chapter and in the next. That idea of a rest. What was the rest to which they would not enter? They were headed for the promised land. But God said, oh, you're not going to get there because of their unbelief, because of their rebellion. As we get to verse 12, we come to the application. Take care, brethren. Remember, he's just a reminder, brethren. We're used to hearing that and just thinking believers. But he's made the case about how Christ has made us brothers. So take care, brethren, that there not be in any one of you an evil, unbelieving heart. And that's going to be a significant term, because really the problem is a problem of faith, or lack thereof. Take care that there not be in any one of you an evil, unbelieving heart that falls away from the living God. And a Jewish reader would say, fall away from the living God. I would never do that. But they're being tempted to leave Jesus and try to return back to their old covenant law way of doing things. And that is, in essence, falling away from the living God. Verse 13, but instead, encourage one another day after day, as long as it is still called today, so that none of you will be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. What sin are we talking about? We're talking about the sin of unbelief. Verse 14, for we have become partakers of Christ if we hold fast the beginning of our assurance firm until the end. And there again is that phrase, firm until the end. We saw it earlier. Verse 15, while it is said, today if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as when they provoked me. Verse 16, for who provoked him when they had heard? Remember, he's quoting the Psalms, which are citing the rebellion that had taken place in the wilderness. Who did it? Indeed, did not all those who came out of Egypt led by Moses? In other words, it was all the Jewish people. And that's who the author is addressing here. He's addressing his Jewish readers. Verse 17, and with whom was he angry for 40 years? Was it not with those who sinned, whose bodies fell in the wilderness? And to whom did he swear that they would not enter his rest? There's that key word again. But to those who were disobedient. So we see that they were not able to enter because of unbelief. Who didn't enter his rest? The ones who did not believe. Don't you follow their same example of unbelief. And that brings us to chapter 4, verse 1. We'll just read it and close on this note, pick it up next time. Therefore, let us fear if, while a promise remains of entering his rest, any one of you may seem to have come short of it. What is this rest to which he refers? Well, we're going to look at that next time.